I crammed so much storage into this table. Is it even worth putting wheels on it? Do you use that pinnable surface? Is it really wood on top? Do you like it? Is it worth it? Do you use it a lot? So if you're thinking like this is out of your budget, don't feel like you need it. You 100% don't need it. Hello friends and welcome or welcome back. I'm Shannon Makes, fabric collector by day, circus artist by night. And last week on the channel, we took a tour of the sewing studio that you see behind me. But there was one notable exception to that tour, and that is the star of the show, the massive sewing table that I have here behind me. It takes up the majority of the space here, and yet I did not touch on it in last week's video because it really warrants a video in and of itself. After a year and a half of almost daily use, I thought I'd go through, check out some of the features of the table with you, and reflect on parts of the table that I absolutely love, that I wouldn't change for anything, other features that maybe weren't as useful as I thought they would be, answer some of the most commonly asked questions about the table, things like, is it even worth putting wheels on it? Do you use that pinnable surface? Is it really wood on top? Things like that. So without further ado, let's dive right in. If you've been here for a while, you'll know that I have an entire video on the topic. It is built entirely, well, almost entirely from recycled materials, secondhand things. A lot of it came literally off the streets of Montreal. I spent all summer pulling various items out of dumpsters and off sidewalks and repurposing them into this table, and I could not be happier with how it turned out. It's a super fun video. Even if you're not interested in making your own version of it, it's still well worth watching. And I crammed so much storage into this table. I could not be more pleased. But the one thing that I think I get the most questions on is actually the height of the table. People ask me about, like, do I have to sew standing up? What's the ideal height for a table? And for me, that was this high. So you can see that my arms are not completely bent at 90 degrees. They're a little bit more open than that, but this is a very good height for me to be able to work and to be able to reach across the whole table, because it is a really big table, which is amazing because I can spread out long swatches of fabric on here to like play with patterning and positioning of fabric. And especially because I do often work with smaller pieces of fabric, it is really important to be able to squeeze every last little pattern piece onto there. And so I do end up playing a lot of Tetris, but that's a really good feature of this table. The downside is that I cannot reach across the entirety of the table because it's so large. So I do find that having it a combination of low enough that I can at least reach to the middle of the table, but high enough that I can comfortably work while standing and I'm not like hunched over as I'm cutting stuff. Super important for me. I did calculate that into as I was constructing it. For reference, I'm 5'4" and this is the height of the surface here, the tabletop. Then to answer the second portion of that question, which is, do I have to sew while I'm standing? And the answer is that I do not have to sew while standing, but I often do, and I quite enjoy it. So before I was using this table, before I had it, this was actually my main sewing table, my only sewing table. It is a highly modified IKEA Expedite unit. I'll go ahead and get into it a little bit more later, but for now, just know that this was my main workspace for sewing, and while the space was not ideal because it's quite narrow, it's very limited and a little bit rocky, I did learn that I really like the height and that I love sewing while standing up. So for me personally, that was also a big important feature of this table, was I did want to be able to have the option at least to sew comfortably while standing. But the good news is that I also can equally sew while sitting, and I've got a stool here. It is a stool, not a chair, but it does work quite well, and I just have to, when I'm sitting down to sew, I sit slightly more forward than I would maybe normally sit on a stool, but it allows me perfect access to the foot pedal. I originally was thinking I would maybe have to build some sort of small platform for the foot pedal to raise it up enough to comfortably work it, but in the end, actually, that was completely unnecessary. The only limiting factor here is that the cord between my serger and my serger's foot pedal is so short that I do sometimes have to tilt the serger a little bit for the foot pedal to sit flat on the ground. But for my normal sewing machine, and for most normal sewing machines, that's not a problem. The cords are sufficiently long. It's just that stinking serger. But you know what? It was like 60 bucks secondhand, and it's been working lovely for over a decade, so I can't complain. Moving on to the next feature of this table that I absolutely love, and as you can see, we're on the ground because we're about to delve into the interior of the desk, which is one of my absolute favorite features of the table. Not only is it just the aesthetic look of the whole thing, the nice whitewashed treatment, and then the Mucha poster. I apologize, I realize I'm not pronouncing that right, but I've forgotten the correct pronunciation.
Alphonse Mocha.
So, not only do I love the aesthetic of it, it does mean that when I lay on my bed, which is right behind you guys, that looking into this room is quite a pleasure. But she's not just gorgeous, she's also useful because she's hiding the door to the inner workings of this table. This is one of my all-time favorite features. You just open it. Like so, and if we pull you in a little bit closer here, you can see what I'm talking about. So, first of all, we've got my iron shelf. Now, I know that not everybody will find this feature particularly useful. If you have a very large sewing space, or perhaps you have a closet that you can stick your iron in, maybe your iron just lives out all the time and you have no need to ever put it away. For me, that's not really a great option. It is a very small room. It needs to be used for many purposes, including sometimes like cleaning it completely out and filming reveals in here. So it is really essential to me that I had somewhere that I could tuck my iron away, because before this it had just been like leaning against a wall. The one closet that I have is not really big enough to fit it well, so having this shelf which fits the iron perfectly, like down to an inch, was absolutely a life changer, and I love it. And it does mean that now I do put my iron away more often than before, because it's just so easy. It's a matter of a couple seconds and then it's tucked away, and the room just looks that much cleaner. And when the room is cleaner, it's easier for my brain to focus on the things I'm trying to focus on. So 10 out of 10 would recommend the custom iron shelf. Then down below it, we have another iron, which does not normally live there, but so what you can't see, but I'll try to give you some B-roll of it right now, is that there is actually a shelf in here in the middle. It just doesn't extend all the way out. It stops right about here. So that shelf, originally I was a little bit bummed that I didn't extend it all the way like the iron shelf, but actually in the end I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because it does mean that if I have too much fabric, if I have an overflow of fabric, I can actually stack it up even higher. If you can't tell, the entire middle of the table is for long storage items. So this is a channel that runs all the way through the table. The table is about 6 foot long, so that's a long amount of space in which to store things like wrapping paper, overlarge tripods. You know, my coutil, which doesn't fold up nicely, is rolled up and jammed in there. Apparently I have a bike pump in here. I did not realize that. Just generally really long items that I didn't have a really good place to store anywhere else. They all live in here, and they didn't really have a great place to live anywhere else prior, because they were just kind of standing up and tucked in different corners of the room and the closet. And now I have a shelf that fits long skinny objects, and it's amazing. And then we tip you down one more. You can see that I've got this basket of stuff. This is just overflow fabric. It's not that big of a basket. You can see that right on top I've got the thrifted IKEA curtains from my Nova Scotia fabric thrifting haul. So this is where they have gone to live. Other than that, underneath this, it's got some fabric for mock-ups, so old cotton sheets that are still in good shape. And then underneath at the very, very bottom, it's got the red fabric from the IKEA couch that I salvaged back in Copenhagen 4 years ago that I swear one day I'll do something with. Then to put the door back on, it is kind of sleek and snazzy. I just have these magnets on here that, you know, correspond with some magnetic clasps on here, and they just snap into place. And just like that, it's basically invisible. You can't tell it is actually a door. Magnetic door and IKEA slats, 10 out of 10. So while the table is getting spun around, I thought it would be a perfect segue to answer another question that people asked on the table video, and that is whether the wheels are necessary or worth it. And I will admit that I wasn't sure if I was going to use the wheels when I put them on. I went into it knowing full well that it's exactly the kind of thing that people put these features on tables and then never end up using them. And so I accepted that that might be the case for me, but I wanted to try it out. I wanted to have the option, and in the end, for me personally, I use it almost every day. Like, it's actually wild how much I use it. Generally speaking, the table always faces the same way just to keep my fabric sheltered from the sunlight, but I do reposition it within the space a lot. So I will say that for me personally, I love having the wheels, and they did turn out to be a feature that I use quite frequently, but I will also say that I'm using them all the time mainly because I have a YouTube channel and I am filming stuff, and it just makes my life that much easier. I think if I didn't have a YouTube channel, I would still be moving it occasionally, but I do think that most people probably don't necessarily need to put wheels on. So if you're thinking about making a table and you're considering, like, do I really need wheels or not? If your budget's tight, I'm gonna say you probably don't need wheels. But if you can fit them into your budget and you're still just wondering, am I gonna use it or not? I will say it this way to you. If you have them, then you have the option to use them. And if you don't have them, you have no choice. You just don't have wheels. So, like, if your room is carpeted, you probably don't need wheels. But if you have a wooden floor and you can fit them in your budget, adding wheels, why not? So here we are, we've gotten the table completely spun around, and now we're on the very exciting side. It's the fabric side, my favorite side to look at. So we'll just kind of briefly go through how I'm using it. I'm not gonna go through all of the fabrics because we would be here for ages, and many of you have already seen a lot of the fabrics in various hauls. If you'd like to see that, I would recommend either this haul video where I got a bunch of fabric from my local fabric warehouse, and I also take you through the warehouse and show you how freaking cool it is because it's such a unique place. Or I would recommend this other video, which is my thrifted fabric haul from Nova Scotia, where I found an incredible amount of fabric, something like 70 yards of fabric for a crazy good price. So if you want to see what's in these shelves, more detail, go look over there. But for now, I'm just going to go through how I'm using this. So if we back it up, you can see that it is one of the, you know, just the basic IKEA expedite unit. So it's got the 4x2 cubbies in here, and all of them except for one are filled with fabric. That one, that's the square over there, that's my serger with the foot pedal cable that's too short. It fits perfectly in there, and I know some people, when I released the video, they were like, oh, you went to all that work and then you just jammed a cardboard box in there. And I'm like, honestly, it doesn't really bother me. Like, I don't feel the need to make it look more aesthetic. So let's go through how I've gotten my fabric in here. So basically what I'm doing is I've just folded it all to fit within these cubbies. I did have some people suggest that I should try basically cutting out cardboard pieces very similar to the way fabric is stored on bolts in a fabric shop, and just kind of wrapping the fabric around the bolt. And I tried it. I started saving up cardboard specifically for that purpose, and I cut a few out, and honestly, after trying it, I didn't like it. That was just me personally. I found it was like way too finicky to make the fabric fit precisely enough, because I have so much fabric and it is kind of a small space that I need to use it as efficiently as possible. And I was having a really hard time with the cardboard to get all the fabric to like fit exactly how I needed it to. So for me personally, I didn't like it, but some of you out there might love it, so that is an option. It just didn't work for me. what I've done is I've just folded them to the appropriate width, and then I've stacked them on top of each other like this. And I'm gonna admit it's not a perfect system. It is a little bit fussy. Like if I want to get this piece of fabric right here, I basically have to pull the entire stack of fabric out, then take everything that's on top of it off to the side, pull it out, put the fabric back, and then take the entire wad and try and jam it back in there. It's not ideal, but it's also working pretty well. And I just think that with the very limited amount of space that I have, I think it is the best option that's feasible for me. Now, if you see this arrangement and you see the whole studio tour and you think that you have a solution that's gonna work even better, please feel free to tell me down in the comments. I am open to other ideas. Some things that I have found that don't work for me. One, stacking the fabric going the other way so that the fabric is going vertically. That didn't work for me. What else didn't work would be, for the most part, putting them in Tupperwares or bins. One, I don't have space. I have a table made specifically like this, but also I really love that I can see all of my fabric. Everything here, it's all very easily visible, displayed. If I have a project in mind, I can just go and see, do I have the fabric for it? What can I use? I love that everything is visible. Yes, it is out in the open, but quite honestly, this setup, because I do know some people are worried about moths. First of all, I've never had a moth problem in Montreal, and I've talked to a couple of friends that say that it's not a huge concern, but also it's actually not better to have them in storage, in bins, locked away somewhere where they never get seen or used. I did some research on this. It's actually better that they're out in the open. So this system is working very well for me. Now, what I originally had was I had it sorted more or less by fiber content. So this was my linens, then I had wools, cottons. What I will say is that that system got completely thrown up by the massive Nova Scotia fabric haul because I added so much fabric into this setup that I needed to use the space more efficiently than sorting it by fiber content would allow me to. So now it is still mainly by fiber content, but it's not 100%. I've also got, like, a lot of the Nova Scotia fabric is down here. You'll recognize the corduroys and the plaids. And then the one box that I have in here, I do have one crate. I know I said I like all my fabric visible, and I do, but this is where I have a lot of my thrifted fabric that comes like in rolls. I have a lot that have been coming in rolls. They're often like taped up or tied up with like these little ties, and I've just honestly, it was working better for me to just throw them all. Just throw them all in here. And it's okay if they're not perfectly visible. Eventually what I might do is refold them, wash them up properly, refold them, and then put some of the smaller scraps down in the bins. I'm not sure. But that's where we're at really so far, and it's working really well. So now I'm gonna spin you around, well, I'm gonna spin the table around one more time, and we can look at some other stuff in here. Actually, change of plans, because I just wanted to stand up for a second. So before I turn you around, I am gonna take a second to talk about this surface here, the tabletop, because I do actually get a fair amount of questions about it. So I thought, let's just address those questions and dive into it. So if you saw that original video, you'll know that it is, well, originally the tabletop is actually 2 1/4 IKEA doors cut down and joined together rather carefully. And then on top of that is one of the few things that I actually decided that I wanted to buy new for this project, and it is a layer of Homosote. So Homosote is usually used for sound insulation. It's kind of like corkboard, except the fibers are smaller and denser, and it's less likely to disintegrate than corkboard. It's also less squishy, but it is pinnable, which is super fun. So underneath this, it's not actually wood. I know a lot of you think it's wood. It's not. It's a wooden backdrop. So it's a sheet of fabric that I've tacked down on top of the Homosote just so it looks nice to be on camera. And underneath it, it is a pinnable surface. And a lot of people have asked me, well, do you like it? Is it worth it? Do you use it a lot? And I will say that I use it all the time. And I will also say it is 100% not necessary. So if you're thinking like, hey, I want to make a sewing table and this is out of your budget to add Homosote, don't feel like you need it. You 100% don't need it. I don't remember what the cost was. It was not crazy expensive, but it also wasn't super cheap. This was maybe because it's quite hard to find in Montreal. I do believe that in the States, it's easier to get your hands on Homosote, but it's not a make or break sort of thing. You can have an absolutely amazing sewing table without Homosote. And I did tons of sewing my whole life without a pinnable work surface, and it was fine. I still loved it. I still made amazing things. Now that I have a pinnable work surface, yeah, I use it. I absolutely use it. In fact, I use it more than I thought I would, and I'm always coming up with funky, weird, new ways to use it. But that being said, I don't need it. It's not essential. So if you're like, hey, I've got the budget to add some Homosote into my perfect dream sewing table, I would say, yeah, sure. I think it's a fun feature, but it's definitely not necessary. And then another thing that a lot of people commented on was they were like, oh, you know, I think I would like a cutting surface. Or they asked me if you can cut on the Homosote. No. You do not cut. Don't use like a rotary cutter on the Homosote. It will dull your blade really fast. It will destroy your Homosote, and you'll have like, your tabletop will be disintegrating. Don't do it. So what you can do is, you can see here, I have this lovely green self-healing cutting mat on my tabletop. I guess technically I did also purchase this, although it's not part of the table, and the only reason I could afford such a big one was because I actually had a gift card to the place where I got it. Somebody had given me a gift card. So I went in to Desserts and I got the largest cutting mat they have. I don't know how big it is, but I'll put it up on the screen. It is more than big enough for my needs personally, more than big enough for, 90% of my projects. There are a couple where it would be nice to have like, yeah, maybe a nice run, the whole 6-foot run, to have a cuttable surface on it. But at the same time, like, my arm is only so long. I can only reach so far into the middle of the table. So do I really need bigger than 36 inches? Probably not. All right, let's get this table spun around. All right, so here we are on the last side of the table, and this is where all the storage of notions and other miscellaneous crafting things happen. And I won't go through them too in depth, but I will briefly pass over them, especially the more fun elements of the table. So I'm gonna start with this drawer right here. So this was not an original feature of the table, but I did always have it in mind that I would like to maybe add it in, but I wasn't gonna go buy it new at IKEA. So I did have to wait till I found one. Again, on the streets of Montreal, someone was throwing it out. So this is the drawer system that comes with IKEA. Like, IKEA sells these little inserts, and this one I find quite useful. So I have got my thread in one. And then here it's clips, fasteners, all that type of stuff, like the metal fasteners. And then on this side, it's buttons, and specifically buttons that have like button cards, because I have another bag full of loose buttons somewhere else. So while I wouldn't want to put these drawers on every cubby here, because I do find them limiting in terms of there are only very specific things that really work well for me to store in here. Having one of them is amazing in terms of just being able to store all these little loose things, and especially to be able to just open this and grab whatever thread I want that matches my project. I find it so useful and so efficient. Then on the drawer just above it, we've got actually another little IKEA unit. They make these like shelf dividers. This one, my friend had a few extra from redoing her condo, and she gave me one. She gave me a few actually. They're super useful in the kitchen, but this one is really useful here. So I've got a projector, because I've always wanted to do one of those spaghetti patterns from an old-fashioned magazine where you have to try to follow the dotted line and figure out which pattern's yours. I've always wanted to do that, and a projector would really help. And then my roll of spray starch for working with finicky fabrics. This can be quite a lifesaver if you're trying to work with slippery fabrics. This really helps them behave a little bit. And then up top, I've got some of my embroidery threads and my smocking pleater. This has a whole story behind it, but basically I've been keeping an eye out for one for a long time because I want to do some smocking, and thus far I've just done it by hand, and I really enjoy doing it by hand, but at some point I will learn how to use this and test it out and I have a whole project in mind that's going to use this. And then basically the rest of these are just a complete hodgepodge of whatever sort of storage situation I have kind of collected over the years here. So they're all secondhand or third hand or fourth hand, and I actually kind of like the hodgepodge look of it. So like some of them are these wicker, none of the wicker matches, and then some of them are the like classic IKEA fabric, and then you've got the drawers, and I don't know, I feel like it's a creative space, and I don't need my creative spaces to look perfect. Like, I kind of like if there's just a little bit of cacophony in them, because the creative process is messy and it's never smooth, and I don't need it to be like amazingly all one united aesthetic. I think it actually kind of works, and it fits super well with the table because the table was recycled, so yeah. So this one here is all of my boot making supplies. I won't go through what all is in here, but it's basically anything that, there was a pattern I was working on at some point. So this is all the stuff that goes into making boots. Underneath it here, as you can see, it's where I store most of my patterns, and it is a little bit chaotic. So we've got, you can see I actually love to reuse IKEA packaging to hold some patterns, like once they've been cut out. So we've got lots of those. It's just a hodgepodge. I've got some envelopes in here. Everything I try to label as much as possible with what it is so I can find it. So a lot of them are in these big envelopes. Then I do have some that are in the classic like big four, this type of packaging. There are some vintage ones down here. This is the skirt that I made. So that's where they all live. So far they fit. I have one other place that I hang patterns, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Then this here is all quilting cotton from making tree skirts. Don't ask, it was a whole phase I had, and I still have the fabric from it. Then this is my UFO bin. So there are some projects in there that might eventually make their way onto the channel. We'll have to see. Then this down here is, for the most part, it's my corset making supplies. Now, I do have a very small space, so it has to serve double duty. We've got some embroidery floss in there. But we've also got all of my corset making supplies. So they live in here, but they also share the space with my unusual fabrics. So I have a tiny bit of silk because I never work with silk, so I have only one swatch of it there. That lives there, and then there's a bunch of, under here is all my interfacing. So that's where my interfacing lives. So corset making supplies and interfacing, and then because we're a small space, the embroidery floss as well. And then last but not least, this is where my notions live for the most part. And it's organized chaos. They all live in Ziploc bags. Without going into too much detail here, I basically just take old Ziploc bags and use them for everything else that doesn't have a home anywhere else in my space, mostly notions. So I have a bag for zippers, I've got another one for ribbons, which I do try to wrap around pieces of cardboard here just to keep them a little bit more tidy, although this is admittedly very much hit or miss. I've got a bag of loose buttons, I have some sewing machine parts in here, and then the really small items get even smaller baggies. They kind of get sub-compartmentalized. And then I've also got a small collection of odd rulers that I don't use very often, and those just get tucked along the sides. Now, is this the best way that I could be storing all of these notions? Probably not. There are probably other ways to do it that are more aesthetic, perhaps more efficient, definitely more organized. But the good news is that this was quick, it was very accessible, it used things I had on hand, like just a bunch of bags, and it is really good in terms of I can cram all of my notions into this tiny little bin and they fit pretty well. The downside is that definitely there are moments where I am too impatient or in too much of a rush to find the correct bag for the notion I want to put back, and it just gets kind of tossed loosely in the bin instead of in the correct bag. So every now and then I do have to go through and sort of resort this out and clean it up, but that's usually a fairly quick process. So all things considered, it is working pretty well for me, but I am definitely up to hearing your suggestions. How are you storing your own notions, and or how would you store your notions given my setup? Because I do feel like this is my Achilles heel of the sewing studio, is I could definitely improve the way that this bin is organized, the way I store all of my small little bits and bobs and notions. But for now, it's doing the job. So after having gone through all the elements of the table with me, are there still things that you have questions on? Do you have any wild creative ideas for ways that I could improve my own storage? And are there any elements of this table that you're hoping to incorporate into your own sewing space? I know it's a little bit hard to take elements from this table. It's such a very customized build, but I do think that if you are in a position to be building a table from scratch, there are definitely plenty of ideas that you could be incorporating into this. So be sure to let me know down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye! Holy cow, I need to sweep underneath there. Wow.